This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Wedge Live podcast. It's a parking episode, and I'm joined today by my co-host Linnea Gotterstad. Did I do that correctly?
Linnea, yep.
Linnea, yeah, not like the council member who I think is pronounced Linnea. You're
the
Linnea.
council member is Linnea, and I'm Linnea.
Okay, and we're also joined by Chris Meyer, who is on the Planning Commission. He is also a Parks Commissioner, which is an elected position in Minneapolis. He's not running for re-election. He's not here as a Parks Commissioner. He's here as a fan of eliminating parking minimums. So
that's right.
I'm going to let Linnea introduce herself. I remember First time I saw you, you were testifying at the Planning Commission in favor of the 2040 plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking that I really like this person. We agree on things, and she's prepared. She knows what to say, and she's not intimidated about testifying at City Hall. And so I remember thinking, I want to know this person, and now I do. Now you're co-hosting a podcast with me.
It's true, and that's exciting. Yeah. Well, we didn't talk, but you saw me in a meeting because we were all testifying. So we didn't all talk to each other. But the first time I remember us having a conversation, which is not necessarily our first conversation, but the first time I remember us having a conversation was at one of the Transportation Action Plans meetings. I think it was like 3 days before the pandemic shut everything down. It was like in March 2020. We were all at the central.
That was the last public meeting that I had gone to was that meeting.
Same. Yeah. It was the last public meeting I attended, and it still is. Like, I've just been on Zoom, I think. But we were in one of those meeting rooms in the central library, and the city staff had put up all the there were all these stations. So there's a station with pedestrian information, bike information for all the different facets of the Transportation Action Plan. And there was a city staffer at each one. And there was a woman who was just having this incredibly uncomfortable conversation with a city staffer. I don't remember which station it was. It might've been the bike station, but it was just getting so intense and heated. And I felt like it was so rude. And I was really feeling for that city staffer. So I went over and just kind of started interrupting and asking, and she, answering her questions and trying to kind of side with the city staffer to just break it up and hope that she would move on. And it felt like I had jumped on a grenade. It was just kind of an intense experience. And
Mm-hmm.
after this woman moved on, John, you came up to me and you were like, "Are you all right?" And I was like, "I mean, yeah, I'm fine." And you were like, "Do you know who that was?" And I was like, "I don't think so." And you said that was Carol Becker. And I was like,
yeah.
"Oh,
you didn't know what you were doing."
I didn't know what I was doing, and
who you were messing with.
I knew who that, I knew that name, and I knew and know who she is, but she had just changed her hair, and I didn't recognize her, and it just didn't register. So I had no idea. And that was the first time I think I ever talked to you in person was that moment.
Yeah, because that was so impressive. I remember that very clearly, but I had forgotten. I'd forgotten that it happened. It's all coming back to me now.
It's the last intense in-person pre-pandemic human experience I had. Great memory.
I think that's why I know that I like you so much was that moment, but I had forgotten. I'd forgotten that was why. You took Carol Becker on, head on. Didn't know what you were doing. You just did it.
Just went for it.
I like that story.
It's a good public meeting story.
Chris, have you ever taken on Carol Becker one-on-one?
Also when we were testifying for the 2040 plan, we got into an argument in the hallway, but not as good as Linnea's story.
You never saved another person from Carol Becker.
My name's Carol Becker, and none of you have the balls to stop this.
I guess my question and a way for you to introduce yourself is, why do you care about parking policy, housing policy? How did you come to care about these things?
Yeah, absolutely. So Really came from being really passionate about climate change. That was something that I really felt like was and is urgent. Really feel like is something we need to be acting on now in a meaningful way. And I grew up in Minnesota. I lived in New York for like 9 years. And then my husband and I moved back here in 2014. And I wanted to do something that felt meaningful on climate change. And kind of the more I volunteered with a few organizations, and the more I learned about it, the more I felt like to really make a real meaningful difference, we need to change the way our cities are built, like the way they're designed. And I think I came to know Wedge Live through another friend of mine who's more active on social media than I am. And then I think I came to know Pyri, heard about Neighbors for More Neighbors, and then was just kind of all in on Neighbors for More Neighbors. So I'm the kind of co-lead of the parking reform task force for Neighbors for More Neighbors. So we've been trying to lead an advocacy push around parking reform in the city of Minneapolis. And so why do I think that's important? I think a lot of your listeners may already be familiar with the subject, but changing the way we think about parking has a bigger impact than it seems like on the face of it. Right now, I think still currently on the books, we do require a minimum amount of parking spaces to be built for every new building, commercial or housing. And that's a requirement that increasingly in the face of climate change, it feels silly and counterproductive. We're designing buildings and spaces, assuming everyone's going to be traveling by car. We should start making the assumption that more people are going to be moving away from that. So what parking reform is about is eliminating that requirement that we build parking, and instead kind of shifting towards buildings and a city that's designed for people to use all kinds of modes of transportation, more sustainable modes of transportation, active transportation, walking, biking. So part of it's just a climate change thing. We can, one of the biggest ways we can reduce our carbon footprint as a city is reducing vehicle miles traveled. So parking reforms can help with that by just making a city that's more amenable to traveling not by car and not assuming that people are traveling by car. And another two things that it really touches as well are equity and housing affordability. Car ownership is incredibly expensive. White people are more likely to own a car than people of color. Wealthy people are more likely to own a car than poor people. It's a punishing way to require people to travel. When you build a city that makes it hard to travel without that, you're asking people to spend a lot of their money, if they're low income, on a car, which is incredibly expensive. So if we can make a city that doesn't financially punish people in that way, that allows people to get around by less expensive means, I think that goes a long way towards just making a more equitable city. If we create opportunities for more complete neighborhoods where people can walk to a lot of their things that they need, their basic needs, that's going to be a lot less expensive for them than needing to own a car. So that's one piece. There's also really just an environmental justice piece. Cars create an incredible amount of pollution. If we can reduce vehicle miles traveled, that reduces the amount of pollution we have in our city. And of course, lower income neighborhoods and neighborhoods with high concentrations of people of color also have higher pollution burdens. So if we can reduce that as well, that's huge. And then lastly, housing affordability is a more unexpected reason to support parking reform, but one that I really like to talk about a lot. Building an enclosed parking space, people have different estimates, but based on different estimates, building an enclosed parking space within a building can cost something like $20,000 to $60,000. So when you're building a building, it just makes a building so much more expensive when you require all this parking be built within it, that then raises the rents that the builder has to charge in the future to kind of recoup the cost of building the building. So it's just a kind of easy, no-brainer way to just make housing more affordable is to stop demanding this. Stop demanding that we build parking that people don't necessarily need. And another thing I would just say at the end is this is anecdotal, but like I hear not infrequently that, we have buildings that have great big parking podiums and they're not full. a lot of them have spaces that aren't taken. A lot of buildings are kind of their own volition beginning to unbundle the cost of renting a parking space and the parking podium from the cost of renting an apartment or unit, because they're not assuming, it's not safe to make the assumption that people are going to use them. Anyway, so that's broad strokes in a nutshell. Why I'm here, why I keep emailing people about this, why I keep testifying about it, and why we've got a task force on the subject.
Okay, thank you for that introduction to the topic. So, Chris, what I remember about you is coming to the city council maybe 2015 and testifying for an earlier version of parking reform, not as ambitious, but for the time pretty ambitious. And you had
It was the most ambitious in the country at the time.
Yeah. And you had bought 13 copies of the cost of free parking for each council member. And you have it there with you.
My name is Chris Meyer. I testified at the Planning Commission, but since then I also bought 13 copies of the book, The High Cost of Free Parking by Donald Shoup, and I'll be handing them out to the council members.
And I think, didn't Blong Yang refuse it? Council member at the time, Blong Yang refused it because it violated the gift policy.
He tried at first. Yeah, he said he couldn't accept it because it was a gift or a campaign donation, and I had to get an opinion from the city attorney that it was for informative purposes.
A high burden to put on you.
Yeah. Technically, it was also given to the council offices as opposed to the individual council members. I mean, I haven't enforced that. I didn't go and
comes
find
with
out.
The office now. You have a Chris Meyer copy of the high cost of free parking.
Yeah, I don't know if the outgoing council members passed it on or not, but yeah, ultimately I was able to successfully give the books away to all 13 council members.
So you care a ton about this issue. You're on the Planning Commission, and you're a big environmentalist. I admire the work you do. So
hold on, I got to plug in my headphones. I just got to notice that they're on low battery.
Okay.
Hold on.
Chris showed up to this episode very unprepared. We had to work out the high-pitched whine that was coming from his laptop.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, so I moved from Sturgis, South Dakota, where the motorcycle rally is. And I wanted to live in a place that was close to my family, but where I wouldn't need to drive. And I've never driven a car in my life, never got a driver's license. That's why I chose to live in the Twin Cities, because I could bike everywhere I needed to go. And yeah, do you remember the first time we met, John? Do you remember the context of that?
I mean, I only remember the first time I see someone on city council TV. That's what I remember. I don't remember meeting anyone in person. So you're gonna have to remind me.
Yeah, you and I met at a community meeting about those parking reforms.
Okay.
That came forward in 2015, and those reforms eliminated the parking requirements for most buildings up to a certain size, within a half mile of high frequency transit stops. And then a lot of other cities around the United States started copying that. And people saw that it wasn't the end of the world. And that really enabled the discussion about eliminating them altogether. So then a few cities started with Buffalo, New York, and Hartford, Connecticut, and then San Francisco, and others started eliminating parking requirements altogether. And it has really been an issue that has gained a lot of momentum. I feel it's been kind of on the same trajectory as issues like marriage equality and marijuana legalization, in that, early on, it seemed like it would be a near impossible goal to eliminate parking requirements altogether. Because if you go to neighborhood organizations, I don't know, probably half the time they're talking about parking and they're always asking for more. So it was really counterintuitive to a lot of people that what we really needed to do is eliminate them. But there have been a few very persistent people who just keep making the case, and we've been winning the argument. And now city after city across the United States uh, is eliminating them, and the Biden administration is coming out against them. Just this week, they announced that they're proposing funding for cities that get rid of things like minimum parking requirements and minimum lot size requirements. So it's really a pretty big success story, and I'm excited that Minneapolis is pretty close to getting across the finish line and getting them eliminated altogether.
And so 2015, we did we went halfway basically. We did it around transit, small buildings.
I would say that's more than halfway, right? Because it was implemented in the areas where it mattered the most, where the large majority of new projects are happening.
Right.
Right. So we took we did the hardest part in 2015. Now we just need to finish the work.
I remember a development proposal in my neighborhood in I think it started in 2012, but it kind of pushed into like 2014. There was a couple of iterations of it, and the sticking point was parking. I think the developer was going to build like an 80% ratio of parking, and people lost their minds over it. And like, I don't know, that'd be kind of high compared to a lot of stuff that's getting built today.
That's right.
And it's also worth noting that you can eliminate a parking minimum. Developers are still building parking. So, going down to 0 as the minimum doesn't preclude developers from building parking that they think their customers or their tenants are going to need.
Yeah, absolutely. They build as much as they think they're going to need. And there's a pretty significant gap between what cities were requiring and what the builders thought they needed. But they're still building maybe like 2/3 of what the requirements used to be.
You know what I like about not building our cities around cars is just the livability aspect. Because a lot of people talk about climate, and I am skeptical that many people care about climate. Like symbolically, you want to be pro-environment, you want to save the planet. But do I want to change the decisions I make on a daily basis to save the planet? Do I believe that my individual choices can save the planet? Which is like, I'm pretty selfish about it. And mostly what I enjoy about not building our cities around cars is just being safer, enjoying my neighborhood more. And so I tend to try to make that argument to people. Like, your neighborhood's going to be a better place. It's good for business. You're going to enjoy taking a walk on Hennepin Avenue for the first time in your life. Things like that. What do you think about?
Absolutely. I think that so often people talk about like their favorite places or their favorite like neighborhoods, and they're places where it's easy to walk around, where it's vibrant, where it's like a complete neighborhood, where it's not like a high speed, like 4-lane highway, like, cramming by them while they're trying to walk down a narrow sidewalk. And that's not about parking minimums specifically, but it's just like, you say that's your favorite thing. Why don't we just make more places like that? Because we can. Like, we can do it. Let's go do it. Every place could be great. What if every place was great?
Yeah. I think what people don't really realize is that regulations like parking requirements make the type of neighborhoods that so many people love illegal to build. Like, most of the places that people love the most, Americans will pay thousands of dollars to go on a vacation to somewhere like Florence, completely illegal to build in a city with minimum parking requirements. We would never be able to fit all of it in. And then within American cities, the most walkable neighborhoods within them were almost entirely built before minimum parking requirements were implemented in the 60s. Take a place like, I don't know, the University of Minnesota campus, or the Loring Park neighborhood. Like, they wouldn't be legal to build if the parking requirements were in place.
And so One of the aspects that's gotten a little bit of attention is the university area overlay, where it was exempted basically from the 2015 reform. Is that accurate?
Okay. So in 2009, which was an even earlier iteration of parking reform that applied mostly to businesses, um, they actually increased parking requirements in the university district for some categories. So they made it based on the number of bedrooms that you had. So in addition to the one parking requirement per unit in the university district overlay starting in 2009, there was also a half parking requirement per bedroom. So if you had a 4-bedroom unit, then it was 2 parking spots in the university district instead of 1. And the reason for that was that they were trying to make it harder to build larger multi-unit buildings with lots of bedrooms because a few of them had.
They don't like student housing, basically.
Yeah, that was the motive behind it. It was a roundabout way of restricting that in certain neighborhoods, especially in like the Como neighborhood and Prospect Park. I was actually an intern in City Hall for Councilmember Gary Schiff, and I was pushing that issue and was able to get Councilmember Gordon to take it on and at least work on reducing it. So that really kind of started the discussion. But before the 2015 reforms that we talked about before, there were actually the 2014 reforms that reduced those bedroom requirements in the university district. But then after 2015, that actually left the university district with higher requirements than anywhere else in the city because they were the only transit stations where you still had to build parking. And it was because they had just gone through it in 2014 and Cam didn't want to undo it so quickly.
Councilmember Cam Gordon's argument was we just went through this process and it would be unfair to everyone who participated in this more recent process to change things up. And so now in 2021, they're implementing some kind of special zoning restriction on bedrooms in like small scale, low density areas.
Yeah. In the first draft, it was going to apply to the entire university district. After some discussions, we were successfully able to bring that down to just interior 1 and interior 2. So it's basically just applying to the Como neighborhood and the Prospect Park neighborhood. So the new restriction is that you can only have up to 9 bedrooms per unit in those interior 1 and interior 2 zoned areas.
9 bedrooms per unit or per?
Sorry, 9 bedrooms per building. Sorry. So if you have a triplex, you can have 3 bedroom units.
Okay. So it doesn't seem ideal to me, but it doesn't seem like a huge deal. It seems better than what was there before.
It was worse before they changed it to not, because initially it was supposed to be interior 1, 2, and 3 within the university overlay had this rule applied. And now I think it's just 1 and 2. Is that correct? So it's still not ideal, but.
Originally it was going to be the whole university district, but then they narrowed it down. And actually, in my neighborhood in Marcy Holmes, the lowest zoning is interior 3. And some people, including like the president of the neighborhood association, indicated their support for allowing more bedrooms here, which was.
I have the language for the current standard in a presentation that was given to the Planning Commission. Control for unique negative externalities related to dorm-style small-scale development through parking regulations. That's the current standard. The proposed standard, limit bedroom count in 1 to 3 unit buildings in the interior built form districts. Basically, they were using parking regulations as a zoning restriction. Now they're moving it into the zoning built form kind of stuff.
Exactly. Which is like, in a sense, parking minimum requirements have been something that have helped, it is a bit of a zoning restriction. If it's something you're required to do, it makes a building that much more expensive, that much hard to kind of fit in your footprint. So it has functioned that way anyway.
And what you hear when you hear complaints about parking at a neighborhood association meeting, it is often about limiting the number of people who can live there. Because if
Yes.
you make the developer build more parking, you are also limiting the number of people who can live there. There's a space trade-off.
That's often the
Yeah.
unspoken hope. Yes.
And sometimes an explicitly stated hope, especially in a lot of suburbs. When we got rid of formal segregation, a lot of places replaced it with basically class segregation by implementing different regulations that made it a lot more expensive to build somewhere. And minimum parking requirements and minimum lot size requirements are the two main examples of that.
And so, are either of you capable of speaking intelligently about traffic demand management?
We could try.
I've been going to public meetings and watching them and listening to them for quite a while, and whenever that comes up, my eyes glaze over and my ears plug up, and I try real hard not to understand what anyone's saying.
All I know is, in very broad strokes, is that traffic demand management, TDMs, have in the past been about traffic. Like, we're just worried about traffic, car traffic clogging the roads, and how we make sure we don't make traffic and congestion that much worse. The new reforms are attempting to kind of turn that on its head and refocus them away. So it's kind of just changing the definition of what a TDM even is my understanding. Is how staff has kind of presented it. We're focusing away from this is all just about car traffic and car congestion on busy roads nearby your proposed development or building. And now what a TDM means is if your building is 50 units or more, or if it's a certain number of square feet for commercial or more, I don't remember the number, you trigger, you're now required to do a TDM. I don't know if do is the right word. Fulfill. I don't know. You have to do a TDM, which means you have to choose from a menu of options to work on traffic demand management. So the menu of options that you can choose from, and they all have different points assigned, are things like reduced fare metro passes, free metro passes for residents, increased bike storage, increased kind of metro transit, informational infrastructure, improved pedestrian realm, like wider sidewalks, like more livable kind of pedestrian spaces. So it's kind of shifting the TDM focus away from just this is about thinking about car traffic and preventing, just focusing on that, and more about how do we help this building be kind of help people move towards more sustainable modes of transportation. Here's your menu of options that you can choose from for your residents or users. It's kind of where it seems to have shifted in the new reforms.
So a developer comes to the city and says, the city used to be prove to us your building can handle the car traffic,
right,
or not exacerbate traffic in the neighborhood. And now the standard is, prove to us you're going to help us meet our goals related to transit and people biking and walking.
Exactly.
I think it was even worse than Linnea is saying, because I mean, they're the only proposed solution before to manage traffic demand was to increase the amount of parking that was expected.
Which doesn't reduce, how does that reduce traffic?
Exactly. It's exactly the opposite. It's right. Completely counterproductive to the stated goal. So now the new TDM policy, really tries to actually reduce the amount of traffic in the neighborhood. If you build more parking, you're going to have more vehicles congesting your roads. But now for projects, if they're 50 units or above, they're going to have to get a certain number of points. For most of them, it's going to be 6 points. So you can pick from a menu of different policies to reach those 6. The one I'm most excited about, and that I'm hoping some developers would take is to give transit passes for their residents. So if they give a Metro Pass, one per unit for all of their units, then that gets all the points that they need to get. Those different policies will really move us in a better direction and actually reduce the number of vehicles on the road. And that was why it's taken so long. Because, in the 2040 plan, it called for the elimination of minimum parking requirements, which would have been a pretty straightforward change to make just on its own. But council members Gordon and Fletcher really wanted to do more than that, and that's why it's taken a year and a half for it to come about.
I remember you being excited about the transit pass thing during the Planning Commission Committee of the Whole, and I was surprised to learn it's like $20 a month, to give a transit pass to a resident in a building.
It is when you buy them in bulk.
Yeah,
Metro Transit has a program for that.
That's a deal.
It's a deal on both ends. Metro Transit benefits a lot from that too.
It's probably cheaper to provide your entire building Metro, like free passes for like a year than to build one enclosed parking space, depending on the number of units. I haven't thought that hard about that math, but it feels comparable based on that number, $20 a month.
Yeah, I mean, there was a study a decade ago specific to Minneapolis, and it found that the average indoor parking spot was about $40,000 a piece, and that's just the upfront capital costs, and then you got the maintenance costs.
Mm-hmm.
Every year, it's a couple $100 per spot, like per month, probably, or I think. But it's more expensive the further underground you go because you have more water issues to deal with, and that's why parking spots are so much more expensive in a place like Washington, D.C., which is basically built on a swamp, right? So there, the parking spots can be $65,000, $70,000 a piece. And then that cost doesn't just go away when you force people to build it. It gets passed on in the form of higher cost of rent or higher prices of goods for businesses.
I've had an empty parking spot for the entire time I've lived in Minneapolis. Yeah.
An indoor one?
No, it's a parking lot out behind the building, but it's mine. I occasionally rent it out.
You could just like could you set up like a picnic table and a grill and like.
People have suggested that. I don't know. I mean, it'd probably be fine. I just would not want to leave my belongings in a parking lot, Right.
Then you'd have to take it all in at the end of the day. That would be a pain in the neck. But it would be a better use of space.
It would be. It wouldn't be very pleasant, though, people pulling in and out.
That's true. Idling next to you.
You could, create a portable garden and just park it there.
Yeah. Although the residents of my building might not appreciate that. You never know. There's always some weirdo who gets irritated that you're doing something different.
I think you should just put in a like gorilla raised bed that just takes up the full space, like garden bed.
I should.
So, John, you're bringing up a point that I feel needs to be followed up by the council, because I'm assuming that you don't have the choice to opt out of paying for that spot, right? Like you can't get lower rent in exchange for not taking it.
No, it's just it comes with the unit.
Yeah. So that means that your apartment is bundling the cost of parking with the cost of rent. And California actually passed a statewide law that requires unbundling for parking. So if you're not using the parking spot, they have to either reduce your rent or give you a cash payment for the value of what it would have sold for. I think that the city of Minneapolis should pass an ordinance to just mandate unbundling, to ban bundling as a practice. That was outside of the scope for what we passed to the Planning Commission this month, but they do get 1 point for their TDM if they unbundle. So they have an incentive now to do that, but hopefully after this, the council will just pass an ordinance.
So we've talked about parking for 32 minutes. Do you want...
And barely gotten started.
Oh gosh, we could go on and on.
We
Do you want this
could.
to be a 5-hour podcast?
We
Because
could do
we'll
a
take it
90-minute
there.
podcast on parking. Although I don't know if I have much more to say about parking.
Oh, I've got lots more to say.
But we're gonna go on. It's a Friday night. We're here talking about parking. I'm gonna play a listener voicemail. It's not about parking, just to
Okay.
kind of break up the monotony for our listeners. I hope you both can hear it.
Please leave a message after the tone.
Okay. Hey, Podfather, it's Anton's mom calling finally. You know, I'm thinking about your podcast and thinking, you know, I think it's okay to break it up into 2 to 3 segments, and maybe that won't feel like, oh, you got to produce so many segments every week, whatever. But I like that you do have prepared topics and questions, and love seeing Anton. I don't usually watch a podcast. I tend to be more of a listener, but hey, I got a very personal note saying I should watch from your darling son. And I would think that businesses get either that one department in the city of Minneapolis reports directly to the mayor, who, in my humble opinion, does not have enough gravitas. I think that's part of this problem. It feels like a boy mayor. And then, have a question for your guest might be, what's your favorite bus route? I like that. And I really wonder if people pay as much attention to the news. Some cultures don't do that. Some people don't do that. And so we don't have a Walter Cronkite that kind of everybody listens to anymore.
Thank you, Anton's mom, for calling the Wedge Life Hotline. I encourage other people to call the number that's scrolling at the bottom of your screen. I don't have it handy. I should probably read it on the podcast since this is a podcast. So, Linnea, what's your favorite bus route?
Ooh, honestly, I'm biased towards the 11 because it stops outside my house, like down the block. Like I can see the stop from this window if I lean over there. And it goes basically to my 2 best friends' houses. So I'm pretty partial to it. And it's like it's high frequency too. It's like every 15 minutes and it goes right downtown. So
Yeah. Some people live in neighborhoods where your favorite bus route is the one you can ride because it's the only one you have.
Yeah. And it's sometimes, I don't know, there's a few other ones that I think are just like I always feel like the 2 is kind of whimsical because it goes in like a crazy zigzag across the city. Mm-hmm. So that's like a little bit fun. I like the 17 because it goes to Spring Street Tavern. So there's a few that just,
Wedge. The 2 and the 17 will bring you to the Wedge.
Oh, and then how about that? There you go.
Chris, what's your favorite bus route?
Well, I've got a lot of nostalgia for the 2 because that's the one I used when I first moved here and as a university student. But my favorite now is definitely the 6, which also gets to your neighborhood and will be the future route of the E-Line bus rapid transit.
On Hennepin Avenue.
Right.
Yes, so it'll be substantially improved. And you should get all your readers to submit a comment saying that the dedicated bus lane should go the entire length. It shouldn't end
for the Hennepin reconstruction.
Yeah.
The comment period is closed, Chris.
Well, they should
still contact your counselor. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Because that's where the power is now.
You can still email the staff.
Should we talk about street parking?
Oh, why not? We love talking about parking, like we said.
Yeah, I was irritated by the Star Tribune recently editorializing against the Hennepin reconstruction.
Right.
And one thing in particular, there was so much to choose from, but one thing in particular was the statistic about removing 90% of parking. And that's only applicable to the street parking. It doesn't include side streets. It doesn't include parking garages, parking lots. A lot of parking lots are totally empty and not utilized on Hennepin Avenue. You do a much better job of sharing parking, getting the YWCA to like open up their giant parking ramp to other businesses if, parking is so needed. Does anyone else have anything to say about street parking?
I just think that numerous studies have shown that removing street parking does not overall hurt businesses or hurt businesses along a corridor. Anecdotally, people say that it does. Maybe there have been kind of one-off instances where people have found that it but like by and large, it just doesn't. When you reshape the street to make it more vibrant and walkable and bikeable, it brings people there. It brings people to that place. Like earlier, we were talking about like what are people's favorite places, and it's like it's kind of the walkable, old-fashioned places that were built before we had all these parking minimum requirements, and we're trying to jam cars into every square foot of everything all the time. So like, and it's just like it just feels really difficult to dispel that belief that if you take away like the 1 or 1.5 parking spots literally outside the front door of my storefront here, it's all over for me. And it's like I kind of feel for business owners who are feeling that, because I think there is some real fear there. And I wish there was a way to kind of just start reframing that, because I don't think that it's true. I
Right.
don't think it's been proven true. It's a myth that I wish we could figure out how to do some myth busting around that.
Yeah, that's I've been thinking about that a lot because there's so many doom and gloom predictions that you will hear at the planning commission or a neighborhood association meeting. And I can think of specific projects, whether it's a bike lane or an apartment building, where things are fine now. It's great. The neighborhood is much better off that we've got a bike lane on 26th and 28th Street. Those are so much better than they used to be, less dangerous. And there were these doom and gloom predictions. I can't think of any that have come true, yet people keep on with them. Like, when are we going to debunk that once and for all?
Right. I don't know. And it feels like, one thought I have too is if you're thinking like, if you're a business owner, right, and you imagine all the revenue you make in like an average day and all the people who must come through for you to make that revenue in an average day, what percent of that revenue is generated by the people who just parked in that one space or 1.5 or 2 spaces that you're going to lose? Like what percent of your revenue is that? And then realistically, that's not even like revenue you would necessarily lose, because it's not like if you're driving down Hennepin Avenue and you see that the spot right in front of the restaurant you're going to is taken. It's not usually the case that at that point you're just like, forget it, I'm not going to dinner. I'm just going to
Right.
go to the grocery store and get frozen burritos. It's all over.
Yeah,
So
they underestimate their customers.
I know, yeah. We're going to come.
Like, I'm not here because you've got a giant parking lot.
Right.
Hopefully I'm here because this is a nice neighborhood to be in. You've got good food. I enjoy being in the Wedge, or I enjoy being in Whittier.
Mm-hmm.
Like, these places have something to offer besides parking.
I think a lot of businesses have misimpressions about who their customers are and how they're getting there, because the customers who are going to speak up and complain are the ones who drove there and couldn't get parking. But if you walked or biked there or bus there, you probably won't bring that up, right? So study after study shows that when you make a place more bike, transit, and pedestrian friendly, that sales go up. But a lot of businesses have misimpressions about that. For Hennepin Avenue specifically, there was the bike lane that went in south of Lake, and I think part of the issue there is that it's not fully connected, right? So I think if or when it becomes a fully connected bike route, you'll see a lot more bike traffic on there.
I can tell you what the issue is. People are just parking in it. Like, if it had been a raised
Yeah.
cycle track,
Mm-hmm.
like, people wouldn't park on it. I mean, just
Yeah.
delivery drivers are parked in there. Everyone and anyone, the National Guard, police, everyone's parking in the bike lane.
Well, the National Guard will park on the sidewalk too, so that wouldn't stop them.
Right.
For most vehicles, we need curb protected bike lanes to really make people feel safe enough to use them.
Nobody respects the paint. Just parking in it.
No. And I just know so many people anecdotally who are, there's different levels of comfort people have just being an urban cyclist. Some people are willing to just like barrel down Hennepin Avenue as is, and just, kind of like, I'm willing to do this. I'm comfortable just kind of taking my life in my hands. But I know other people who are not even comfortable biking down, comparatively, slower and less high traffic roads because they're worried about getting doored. They're worried, they just don't have that comfort level of just like, I kind of understand that I'm vulnerable right now and I'm willing to go with it. So, there's a whole population out there that really would benefit from having protected bike lanes. I feel like we act like it's a luxury, and it's like, well, some people are going to bike if you have it and won't otherwise.
Yeah, it's amazing to see people biking on the sidewalk, like near Bryant Avenue.
Right.
It's like, I think of that as a very calm street to bike in the street. Some people are not comfortable doing that. Cars are scary. I'm all out of parking topics, guys. And my voice is failing.
How? We barely got started, John.
Are you going to suggest something, Chris? What should we talk about now?
Actually, I had another. Oh yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Well, I mean, John, you downplayed climate change a little bit, but I mean, in all of the central blue cities, pretty much every elected official says that they care about climate change, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the main ways that they can actually act on that.
Electric cars are coming online, Chris.
That will barely make a dent. I mean, it's important. Like I've done a lot to push, more electric vehicles, both on the park board and on the planning commission, but it's not enough. You need to reduce the number of vehicles, and the 2040 plan calls for reducing vehicle miles traveled by 38%. I mean, those are the type of goals that we need to work toward if we really want to meet our climate obligations under the Paris Plan. And this is something where you don't have to ask a single Republican to support this and make really substantial change. And I just want to emphasize how large the change is. Like Seattle did a pretty good study about it, and Seattle didn't even fully eliminate parking requirements, but they did reduce them. And a study there found that the amount of money that was spent on building parking, what was actually built versus what would have previously been required, was about $500 million. I mean, so we're talking like tremendous amounts of money to make this change. And the most comprehensive study nationwide was done in 2002, and it found that the total overall value of the parking subsidy that we give, the parking requirements that we have, the regulatory value, was about like $370 billion per year. Like, I mean, we're talking enormous amounts of money. Like, it's on par, like with the military. So if we really want to have an impact, this is one of the places where cities can really do that on their own, instead of mostly, like, there are a lot of symbolic things that cities do, and those are important, and I support them. But when a local candidate talks to me about climate change, like, my first question is always about the things that they actually have direct control over, and this is one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, and Chris, as you said earlier, you're setting a standard. You're being a role model for neighboring cities, for cities across the country.
Mm-hmm.
If you do something and it works, it's a success. Other people will emulate it. So things that happen in Minneapolis do matter beyond Minneapolis.
Absolutely. The analogy is no one wants to be the first penguin because they get eaten by the shark, right? But if you have the courage to do it, then you can have a very disproportionate impact.
I've never heard that, Chris, about the penguins. Have you
Me
heard
either.
that one?
So
People don't say that, Chris. You just made that up. But it makes sense.
yeah, well, I mean, when a city does that, it has a really big impact because then lots of other cities follow. And Minneapolis did that in 2015. But then a lot of other cities, went beyond us and eliminated parking requirements altogether. So we're falling behind a bit. But we can still be the first one in Minnesota to do it. And, I guess the other main thing I want to get across to your listeners is just they need to take some action to help make this happen. So the Planning Commission passed the elimination of parking requirements and the TDM reform unanimously this month, but now it goes before the council. So it's tentatively scheduled to go before the Minneapolis Council Committee on May 4th, and then would go to the full council on May 14th. So people should contact their council members and tell them that they support that. And then in St. Paul, their planning commission is at an earlier stage of considering this. And they basically put forward two options. One that eliminates parking requirements altogether, and then another that reduces them based on like certain factors like proximity to transit stations. So we really need to push the St. Paul Planning Commission and the St. Paul Council to fully eliminate theirs as well. And then you got to work on all the suburbs. And one thing, while I'm very excited about the TDM changes that we made, because I think they really go above and beyond to reduce vehicle traffic and promote public transit, biking, and walking. I also don't want to send the message that you have to do that in order to eliminate minimum parking requirements. Like the argument for eliminating minimum parking requirements applies, to every city, to every location, regardless of whether there's any public transit at all. In places that aren't transit friendly, there's going to be a much stronger demand for parking. But we should let the builders decide how much of that to provide. I mean, a minimum parking requirement is only ever going to be either useless or harmful. So it's either going to be a parking requirement that's low enough that that amount of parking would have been built anyway, in which case it doesn't have any impact, or you're going to force the developer to build more than what they would have. And out in the suburbs, even in a place that doesn't have a whole lot of transit accessibility, sometimes if they have like a parking requirement of 2 spots per unit, I mean that might still be higher than what they might have otherwise built at 1.5 or something. So this is really a campaign that we need to bring to every city. And the arguments are different city by city. Like in the very democratic controlled central cities, we make a lot of climate arguments and affordability arguments. In rural areas, it's more an argument of fiscal responsibility, right? And then there are other arguments that I could connect it to, like
stormwater.
Really, one of the the surface parking creates all kinds of ecological damage. I even connected to things like foreign policy, like if we want to fight against dictatorships in Russia and Saudi Arabia, like one of the ways that you can do it is by reducing the demand for oil. And parking requirements are a huge subsidy to the oil companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we on the other parking reform task force members at Neighbors for More Neighbors and I have like talked about a bit about how in some ways parking minimum requirements just feel like this gift to the fossil fuel industry. It's like, here is this gift that we just give you. You know, we build this infrastructure that incentivizes driving, because studies have shown that it does. You know, that if you build parking, it does incentivize it. It almost feels like if every apartment unit in Minnesota was required to just like provide a carton of cigarettes per month, you know, and like you had to pay for that with your rent, and it's just a thing we required, you know, you'd stand up and say like, why are we just giving this gift to the tobacco industry? Like, I don't smoke, I don't need this. Like, some people do, and that's fine, but why is there this requirement? This seems silly. At some point it starts to seem that way. I also want to echo what Chris said, that we're really excited about parking reform, and we're not done yet. We still need support in Minneapolis. We still need to go to the council and make sure that it passes both at that committee level and at the council of the whole as well. And I'll be honest, I'm really bad at paying attention to other cities. So I don't know that much about St. Paul, so I'm glad Chris mentioned it. And then the last thing I have to say is I thought of another bus route that I feel like is whimsical. The 83, which I think goes up and down
83.
Lexington and St. Paul, is like a bus that is not actually a normal sized bus. It's like a small bus, almost more like a van. And it has
I've
to be
seen
because
those in Bloomington.
there's one that I want to say it's the 83, and I want to say it goes up and down Lexington. So someone may be like listening to this and really frustrated because I don't have it quite right. But it has to go under this bridge near Como Park. So, and a bus can't fit. So it's like this funny van that feels like an airport shuttle. And I've always felt like that's another very whimsical bus.
Do you have a website to plug for Neighbors for More Neighbors? Like, is there a parking page you can direct people to?
Well, no, that would be great if I did have that. If you go, the website for Neighbors is moreneighbors.org, I believe.
Moreneighbors.org.
Mm-hmm.
And people will be able to navigate to some page or other to get involved.
We do have a blog on there which has posts that has had action alerts about parking. You can sign up to get our email alerts, and we are going to be able to, we'll be sending out action alerts as the parking kind of moves more towards the council. So you can hear from us that way. We'll have a lot to say.
I think I was supposed to make fun of Chris Meyer in his Geography Bee video. I didn't watch the Geography Bee video.
I've been waiting for this to come up. You didn't watch it?
Yeah, I think Chris wanted this to be like a roast of Chris Meyer, so he sent me embarrassing videos about himself. And I didn't have a chance to watch the videos, but I promised to play them, you know, during the episode. We'll find out what's in those videos. Videos taken by Chris's mom.
Gateway question. You tell a friend you just visited Dover. She asks if you saw the White Cliffs. You laugh because the Dover you visited is in the United States. Yes, Chris. Delaware? Delaware is absolutely correct. Delaware is the answer.
I don't think it's that embarrassing. I just watched the episode that you did with Peggy Sue. So I just mentioned one of my accomplishments in high school, which is one that when I won the high school geography bee and got $25,000 for it.
That's a lot of money. Was that a statewide thing?
It was a national thing.
Oh, national. Okay.
I feel like they're not as
national.
Yeah, national level. I feel like they're not as embarrassing as you'd hope because he's doing very well. That's why he won.
He was just bragging. He wasn't trying to get me to embarrass him. Yeah. He was bragging.
The best part, I watched a few minutes of both of them, and the best part is like you hear either the woman who's filming or the woman next to her at some point whisper like, "Oh, they're nervous."
Yeah. That's my mom. That's
the best part so far for me.
What was the winning question? Was there a winning question?
It was a points-based competition.
So there was no winning. It wasn't like the spelling bee where. What's a hard geography bee question? Try and stump us.
So when they were reading the questions, once you buzzed in, the question ended, and I got a lot of points because I was able to figure out the answer with only part of the question. So I think the best one was Angora hats. So just, that's it. Angora hats, buzz.
And what was the answer?
Ankara, which is the capital of Turkey. And before it was Ankara, the Greek name was Angora.
Okay.
Yeah, my dad was a social studies teacher. I grew up in his room. His room, my room used to be his study. So I grew up with maps all around me. I keep maps all around me. Knew every capital in the world when I was 9 years old. Didn't learn how to tie my shoes until I was 12. And I only learned how to tie my shoes at that point because my feet were too big to wear Velcro shoes anymore. If there were Velcro shoes big enough, I probably would have never learned.
I didn't realize.
Like if I'd have grown up with Amazon and could just order them, like I wouldn't have bothered.
Do they not make adult Velcro shoes?
They do now. They didn't when I was a kid.
The kids today have so many advantages.
Did you switch back to Velcro?
No, I've put in the effort to learn how to tie my shoes, so I'm going to use it.
Well, you don't want to lose that skill, so you got to keep up with it.
Linnea, do you have any like impressive achievements from your youth that you'd like to bring up?
No. I didn't know that was a prerequisite to being on this show. I graduated high school. I was in soccer.
Soccer, okay.
Our team was really bad, actually, which is not my fault. We're a team, right? But we were a very bad soccer team. So I can tell you about that.
Okay, that's a good way to end the show. Are we done?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you for joining me. My guests have been Linnea Gotterstad from Neighbors for More Neighbors, one of my personal heroes, and Chris Meyer, who's on the Planning Commission and won $25,000 in a National Geography bee. Thank you both for joining me.
Thanks for having us, John.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.